Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians of the land where we meet today here in Adelaide, Australia. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and also acknowledge the connection the Kaurna people maintain to their land, the connection to culture and connection to country. I'd like to tell you a bit about myself. I'm presenting today a collective booklet, and the name of the collective booklet is Out of the Shadow of Domestic Violence, Using Narrative Practices and Collective Documents to Render Visible the Values, Hopes, Dreams and Acts of Resistance of Women Survivors. And I will tell you, I'm from New South Wales, the North Coast, mid-north to North Coast, New South Wales, and I live in a town called Nambucca Heads. So Nambucca Heads is situated on Gumbaynggirr country. They're saltwater people, and the Gumbaynggirr people have the ocean as their totem. So the country stretches from the Nambucca River in the south to almost the Clarence River in the north, and then out west to the Great Dividing Range. The Gumbaynggirr people are renowned as sharing people because the resources on their country were very fruitful. So renowned for sharing with other tribes that had come through and doing a lot of trade with those resources. So I live in Nambucca, but I work in Coffs Harbour, which is also on Gumbaynggirr country. And Coffs Harbour is famous for the big banana. So when you're thinking about fruitful, there's a big banana in Coffs Harbour. So people come from all over the world to have their photos taken with the big banana. And also a tourist attraction of the area is the whale watching. So quite often while the whales are migrating up and down the coast, there's a number of boats out in the ocean watching the beautiful display of these gorgeous whales. So I work in Coffs Harbour, and so Coffs Harbour and Nambucca are about halfway between Brisbane and Sydney on the east coast of Australia. A really beautiful country. In Coffs Harbour, I work for a service called Warina Domestic and Family Violence Specialist Service. So Warina has a number of programs that are for supporting women who are impacted by domestic and family violence. So Warina covers from Kempsey in the south up to Yamba and out west, and some of the isolated communities further west from the east coast. So my specific role at Warina is within a program called Safer Pathway program, and my role is as a safety action meeting coordinator. So what that all means is the program Safer Pathway is where police will respond to any domestic violence incident. It doesn't need to be an offence, it's just a domestic violence incident that they've attended. They will log into their system on a database, and that generates a referral to our team. So our team will then attempt to make contact with those women, conduct safety assessments, offer support, referral, and checking in to see how things are going with them. And we take really great care in that first initial contact, because it may have been the first time a woman's ever spoke about this issue, about being in a domestic violence relationship. So we're also very aware that in speaking to that, it poses or it can increase the risk to her as well. So that's a part of the Safer Pathway program in general. However, my specific role is, as the Safety Action Meeting Coordinator, is to facilitate meetings with upper level management, government and non-government services. So within these meetings, we get together fortnightly. It's responding to women who are at high risk. So high risk of being killed and high risk of significant physical injury. So within these meetings, part of it is to develop an action plan. So it is the community and those in the community in positions of power and privilege are to support developing these safety plans. So it's a community response to keeping women and children and men safe who are victims of domestic violence. So it's taking away the responsibility from the woman or the victim having to maintain all of that expectation. What is she doing to keep herself safe? What is she doing to keep her children safe? Well, now it's time that we step back and as a community then step in to provide support and what we can do to keep her safe. So within my work context, I was having to come up with a narrative practice innovation. So it sort of got me thinking that, I've observed the power of sharing in group processes. I've observed the power of women sharing with each other, just having a yarn at the table, having a yarn with workers, but really observing the power in sharing of stories and knowledges. So it got me thinking that what I wanted to do and how I could translate the narrative practice innovation into my work context was to co-author a collective document, so sharing women's experiences and impacts of domestic violence, whilst co-authoring the rendering visible unique outcomes and alternative storylines. So this, I believe, would make possible an opportunity for women to have their voices heard. So throughout this process, it was really important that I was cautious about the ethics of care, accountability and responding to power and privilege throughout the development of the shared booklet. And quite often I would have women present to the service, or women who I had engaged with in my work and even in community, who will attend and they're measuring themselves up against what it is to be good enough, or the expectation that's placed on them from society, from the power and privilege in organisations, the gendered discourse and the ratings and scalings of what it is to be good enough. What it is to be good enough as to be a good enough woman, to be a good enough wife, to be a good enough mother. And quite often these expressed experiences of failure are supported by organisations, organisational structures, for instance, child protection and police and courts. So what is it that you're doing or not doing? And that's really taking the focus and the accountability away from the perpetrator and placing all the blame on the women. So I was really careful in developing this booklet not to recreate the power and privilege or recreate a feeling of failure in terms of participation. So I found a few quotes that really resonated for me throughout this process, and one of them is a belief that a person does not measure up to cultural expectations can quite easily discount the alternative skills, competencies, beliefs, values, commitments and abilities that the person has achieved. And Michael White speaks to, the women are not passive recipients in this situation. There are many, many things that they're implementing each minute of each day to ensure their safety, to ensure their children's safety, and monitoring, constantly safety planning. So that quote really resonated with the creation of this document. And I think one of the big things for me is that there's this age-old question of, well, why doesn't she just leave? You know, why doesn't she just leave? Still not placing the blame on the perpetrator, but putting all of the responsibility onto the woman. And another quote that resonated for me was, co-authoring with knowledge, the dominant story also often intersects the disadvantage and trauma. So when we go back to why doesn't she just leave, quite often women don't have access to the resources to do that. There's a limited availability with housing. There's minimal support in terms of safety with police and courts and child protection and organisational structures. So why doesn't she just leave? Quite often there's limited resources, as well as having to try and negotiate through the impacts of the trauma. Another idea that was sparked during this creation is that, you know, the engagements are often steeped with institutional practices of power and privilege that require deconstruction of dominance, whilst ensuring gendered histories were acknowledged and challenged. And quite often when women meet with us, when they're measuring themselves up to these ratings and scalings, there's the patriarchal discourse, a disadvantage, the racism, the sexism is quite often very present in all engagements when women are victims of domestic violence. So I got started, I started to develop the booklet, and had 4 women that were very generous in offering to share their stories with me. And as we started on the process, it was really important for me that I was aware of my position of power, my position of being a paid woman, and creating the booklet, and that women were coming from another perspective. I had to be aware that I was in a position of power and privilege through the creation of the booklet. And maintaining a therapeutic posture of being decentered yet influential. So being decentered in constantly checking in with the women, is this okay for you? Is this question okay? Is this direction okay? And being very mindful not to impose my insider knowledges or bring forth knowledges of other women that I've heard or they've shared their stories with me, whilst maintaining the decentered yet influential therapeutic posture. I was reminded of my influence in the questions. So although I was staying decentered, it was important that in terms of the booklet, I was actually being influential in the questions that I asked. So I had to balance it out to ensure that I wasn't recreating power and privilege in that setting. So another one of the really careful considerations that I put at the forefront of this engagement was around ensuring that there's support for the women. So what supports had they had prior to coming to see me, or what supports they had during the creation of the booklet, and what supports they would have afterwards. So really following up with what family supports, what friendship supports, and any professional supports that may be required. And offering some clear options around the process. So if they've decided that they want to participate and then decide that they don't want to, that's okay. The services, support or engagement will not change because of that fact. I wanted to offer flexibility around the questions, so I had collaborated with them around what questions they see may work best for them. Gave them a sheet of questions prior to an interview so that they could go through. They had a choice They could choose one or a few, or they could choose all to answer. And with all this in mind, it was around safety planning. So safety planning with them, how to keep them safe through it, emotionally safe and physically safe through this process. So a lot of careful consideration in ensuring that this collective document would be for the benefit of the women who participated, as well as for those who read it. So once we started on the journey of asking questions and doing the interviewing, a common theme started to shine through, and that was around breaking the secrecy. So there's a quote that really resonated for me, and it's breaking the secrecy was shaped by the intention to protect oneself from the psychological hurt, a refusal to allow the perpetrator to get away with his wrongdoings, and a determination to prevent the perpetrator from hurting others. So all of the women spoke about this shrouded in secrecy. You know, domestic violence is shrouded in secrecy. So it was important for them in the sharing that their voices were heard and they were breaking the secrecy. And one of the women in particular spoke very strongly about how she fought to get her ex-partner on a register for high-risk domestic violence perpetrators, because it was important to her that other women who have access to that know, and therefore she was feeling that she in some way could help prevent another woman from being hurt. And another really strong theme that shone through was definitional ceremonies deal with the problems of invisibility and marginality. They are strategies that provide opportunities for being seen in one's own terms, garnering witnesses to one's worth, vitality and being. So another really strong theme was how they felt invisible. Invisible from systems, invisible from families, invisible in their own self. So an important part of their sharing was also to be seen or heard and have other people witness to that, so that this is garnering witnesses to one's own worth, vitality and being. So it was a really important element for them in the sharing of the document. And another hope for them was that it would offer connection for other women who may not have access to certain supports in their community. So in the creation of the questions, I really focused on how could I weave in Michael White's narrative maps. And there's only a few here on the PowerPoint. There's quite a number that were drawn into these questions. However, these are some of the ones that have sort of stood out for me. The externalising conversations map, you know, really, really important in terms of commencing on this double story development process, externalising domestic violence so that we could seek and experience near definition for the women. Then the reauthoring maps as well, really searching for the absent but implicit through the landscape of identity, however focusing as well on the landscape of action. And highlighting unique outcomes, really bringing forth and rendering visible the skills, knowledges and experiences that the women had been demonstrating throughout these times. And then scaffolding conversations, so really thickening up those stories, those rich stories of how they got through the dominant problem story of domestic violence. And underpinning that, the migration of identity map. So, you know, really in building on the double story development, this is where they'd come from. This was the dark times for them, where hurt, harm and trauma were occurring. Moving through what some of those challenges were, how they managed to manoeuvre and keep themselves safe, or how they managed to get through those challenges, and then to their preferred destination and what that looked like for them, and that's shown through in the sharing of their stories. So what I would like to do now is invite you on a bit of a journey with me with, it's called an interview with Angela. However, I would like to let you know that Angela doesn't exist. Angela is a collection of the 4 women's stories. So I felt it was very important that I could draw out elements of each women's story in the interview process and have that included in each of the answers.
The sharing. Can you tell me about your hopes and reasons why you have decided to share your story?
Yeah, you know, if my story can help one woman realise that she can get out of this situation and not only survive, but eventually thrive, then it's worth sharing. Domestic violence is so isolating. It's become trendy a bit in the media, but really, it's a silent crime. I believe there's power in sharing stories, and it's important to offer connection for women who are facing the same isolation and shame. Domestic violence, family violence, whatever cutesy mantra we want to attach to men's violence against women, it's shrouded in secrecy. They mistakenly think that we're protecting our abusive men, but I think it's women protecting themselves from the judgment and protecting their kids. My hope is that if another woman might be able to close her eyes for a moment and take a breath and say, I can get through this, I'm strong enough to get through this, and there really is light at the end of the tunnel.
What does it say about what you value in your life and value in other women?
I feel that the sharing my story with other women demonstrates that I value the underlying resilience that we as women have within us, even when we aren't aware of it. Sometimes it just takes someone else to point out that we're resourceful and that we are strong. Women are intrinsically survivors. We are strong. We don't always feel strong. But mate, we get up after beatings. We look after our kids even when we feel hopeless and helpless. I admire that in all women who are dealt a bad hand. I love that women are so strong, and when we band together and stand together, we can actually change the world. We have changed the world before. We can do it again.
Why is it important to you that other women know about this?
For a long time I've felt very isolated in my experience. Of course, I knew other women had gone through this, but I was so beaten down and so lost in my head, believing the things he told me. You know what, he was never right or honest about any bloody thing, so how could he have been right about who or what I was? I want other women to know that they are not the sum of what an abusive, cowardly partner has told them. It's so important for women to allow themselves the opportunity to love themselves, be proud of who they are as individuals, and to know they are incredibly strong.
The effects. Can you tell me about the domestic violence you were subject to?
The adrenaline jolt, the monster, the walking on eggshells. You know, we lived through a lot of physical violence. The house was smashed up regularly. My possessions were usually the target. Psychological abuse, financial abuse. The pets were targeted to a lesser degree. There was also sexual violence. You know, being forced to have make-up sex when you can't actually breathe through your nose because it's full of blood. Or you think that you have a cracked rib. That's not make-up sex, that's something else. When he would come home from work, we'd know by the way he pulled up in the car or by the way the front gate slammed what sort of day he'd had. I'd experience an adrenaline jolt at the sound of that gate. He'd beat the shit out of me, smash the house up. I'd get him out of the house, never with the help of police, because they'd show up and ask him what I'd done to piss him off. And then he'd starve us out. I was never allowed to get medical treatment for injuries because that would point a light at him, and I couldn't risk losing my kids by doing that. Financial abuse was also there. You know, he was never willing to go partnered with Centrelink, always insisting I get the loans taken out in my name so he could buy himself stuff. Many forms of control. I could only wear gender neutral clothing. If I wore women's clothing, I was accused of trying to impress someone else or having an affair. If I did buy something, he'd slash it up with knife or scissors, or he'd just take it out the yard and set fire to it. Yeah, when I started working, he allowed me to buy some exclusively work clothes so that my colleagues wouldn't get suspicious. Then his behaviour started to impact on my work. He was stalking me at work, calling to check I was in the office, turning up with coffee unannounced. And in the beginning, he sort of appeared like a loving, supportive partner. And there was instances while I was completing my uni degree, where he would delete whole assessments in order to try and make me fail.
What were the effects of the domestic violence?
I think I have PTSD, extreme anxiety and depression. I live with that and deal with that to the best of my ability. But, the effects on my children is really harder for me to deal with. There was intense social isolation from family and friends. Family sort of knew to a degree what was happening, but didn't really know what to do. So it sort of became an unspoken topic of conversation. And in my personal life, even a simple decision such as what to have for dinner was a monumental task. It was frustrating for people around me, and I'd get frustrated with myself. Learning to speak up for myself, it was tricky. Often still feel unworthy of having my opinion heard or what I want to happen. I've had employment threatened due to his behaviour, stalking workers trying to find out info about me, vexatious complaints made by him and his extended family to my employers, insisting that my employment be terminated. And me and the kids, we deal with substance abuse, self-harm, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, and I live with almost crippling guilt, about the long-term effects on my kids.
What were the different ways that you tried to endure the different forms of domestic violence?
There was a lot of compliance in order to remain safe in dangerous times. Other strategies used were hiding saved copies of assessments in areas of the house that I knew he wouldn't be interested in looking in, such as the vegetable crisper in the fridge. So I think I'm the queen of plan B, C and D. It's like being hypervigilant. You always have to have a backup plan because you just never know what's going to happen next. The physical violence was the most terrifying. However, the bruises healed. You learnt to ignore the scars and live with the niggling aches and pains. I actually learnt which part of my body could take the biggest hit and hurt the least. And my mum, she set up a bank account in her name, and I used to put small amounts of money away each fortnight ready for the escape.
What strategies did you try to implement to keep yourself safe, your children safe and your family safe?
I put locks on my children's bedroom doors on the inside so that they could keep themselves safe in their room and keep him out. Many times the children and I would lock ourselves in the bedroom and hide inside, or we'd climb out the window. I had 4 sets of car keys hidden around the house and outside in the yard. I kept $100 additional money and bank card and clothes hidden in my car, usually where the spare tyre goes. And I'd swapped a fake car key onto my ex's key ring, and therefore he thought he had a key as well. We had an escape plan. At times we'd have to flee the house. When I knew he was drink driving, I'd call 000, let them know where he was going and what car he was driving. I was always disappointed when he made it home and the police hadn't caught him.
Can you describe the hurdles, challenges and struggles you came up against once you left the domestic violence relationship?
Yeah, uncooperative police who did not see the harm in hitting your wife. I was constantly asked, what was I doing to piss him off? You must have done something for him to hit you like that. I was judged for speaking out, and many women in the community stopped talking to me. Their husbands stopped allowing them to associate with me and the kids, because now I was the single woman in town. My children were treated poorly by many in the community. My ex-husband, he had no regard for the law. always endured constant breaches of AVOs that entailed countless times going to the police station and courthouses. This was both emotionally taxing and really frustrating. Family law was particularly difficult. You know, I was having to prove I was a victim, but you know what? He wasn't having to prove that he wasn't a perpetrator. That system's all screwed up. You know, kids went off the rails. I looked incompetent and hopeless as a mother, an often repeated myth he liked to tell me. I found myself without a home, having to find housing was really difficult. And I thought once he was gone and we were safe, you know, things would get better and easier, but they didn't, not for a long while.
How do you get through these hurdles, these challenges and struggles?
So getting advice, you know, from reliable sources, not your neighbour or the friend down the road who went through something similar, was getting professional advice. That was really beneficial. And I became a fighter, I reckon. I was no longer going to be reactive to his actions, and I began to take control of my situation. You know, my dad used to live by the mantra, only worry about the things that you can control and don't worry about the things you can't. So I stopped worrying about him and focused on me and the kids. And once I got into this mindset, everything became a bit more manageable. It wasn't easy. We still had hurdles and obstacles, but we seemed to cope with them a little better. You know, and the kids and I, we started to create our own daily and then weekly routine, joining different activities and meeting new people. You know, and soon we had a whole range of friends, and soon we were totally different people. But you know, we're our true selves. And one thing that I did too is I also signed him up for several different religious newsletters, opted to have them emailed to his email daily. Knowing that he was receiving these spam emails really lifted my spirits.
Identity. How have you been able to keep in touch with hopes and dreams?
Well, I think it's the little victories that have helped me keep fighting my way towards, you know, especially finishing my uni degree. Through this degree, I want to help other women. That keeps me connected to the dream. You know, I want to go on to live a proper life, like a proper person. Setting small, realistic and achievable goals in those early days was so important. You know, viewing things like getting out of bed, having a shower, or doing the shopping, or even meeting up with someone, you know, such an achievement, and was critical in those early stages. I've got many hopes and dreams, you know, but I think if I looked at the bigger picture, I'd feel overwhelmed, and it may lead to feelings of disappointment. So, you know, I think first I had to give myself the opportunity to settle into my new normality.
Have there been ways that you've been able to lessen the effects of this trauma in your life? If so, how have you done this?
By accessing counselling, you know, for myself and my kids, educating myself around the dynamics of domestic violence, speaking to family and friends about my experiences. That lessens the effects of shame, and by accepting that this was not my fault. And I have made so many positives in my life. Keeping busy and task focused has also been important, and knowing what I can and can't control is really critical. I know I can't control the legal system, so I don't bother channeling any energy into that. I can control things like my washing, however, and do so often and so thoroughly that my kids are convinced it's my hobby.
Can you tell me about the skills, the knowledges and the strategies that you have that got you through this difficult time?
I think I've learnt to understand that I'll have difficult days. There may be a simple word or a phrase, a sound or a memory, or even something that I hear or see that will instantly take me back to a horrific memory or event. I now accept this for what it is. I allow myself to cry and get upset and understand that my domestic violence history will always be a part of who I am. Acceptance for me was very important. I've learnt to let the shame go and understand that I'm no longer that woman that accepts any less in my world of what I am truly worthy of.
The sharing of knowledges. What would you like to say to other women who are experiencing similar situations to you?
Yeah, be safe, look after yourself and breathe. It really will get better. It might be slow, but there is a light at the end of this, and you can do this. The messages you've been given that you're not enough, you are more than enough.
Is there anything else you feel is important to share?
That it will take time, it will take immense strength, which you've already demonstrated. You just may not have seen it. You will, and it will be better than okay. It will be great. Have faith in yourself. You can do it, and much, much more. If I can come out of this and go to university, then any woman can rebuild her life to look the way she wants it to. It's not an easy process, but you've already survived incredible hardship. You can do anything. So thank you for joining me on that journey with Angela for that interview. I'd really like to read out the powerful quote from Andrea again, and really sit and have a think about how this has been transformed into her life and the lives of many other women. So Andrea's powerful quote: "I love that women are so strong, and when we band together and stand together, we can actually change the world. We have changed the world before, we can do it again." So the hope for us, the hope for the women involved, and the hope for myself is that in the co-authorship and development of this booklet of shared skills and knowledges of women who've been impacted by domestic violence, the hope is that women who access my service and other services who attend remote communities, or women who are unable to get to support for various reasons, the hope is that it will offer an alternative, and we hope that it reduces some isolation and possibly increase connection.